Hi, I'm Dr. Nicole Lipkin, and this is the Hey Kiddo podcast where we talk about all things parenting. Today, we're tackling an important topic: how to help our kids build a healthy relationship with money. And look, money is more than just numbers, it's emotional, it's relational, it's the way we talk about it as parents ends up shaping our kids' financial mindset for life. So, how can we model healthy money habits and set our children up for financial well being? And to help us unpack this, I'm joined today by Nick Ashburn, the founder and CEO of Persona Wealth, a digital financial wellness company that blends psychology and financial planning to help families make money decisions that align with their overall well being. Nick holds a master's in education and human development from the University of Pennsylvania, a certificate in financial therapy from Kansas State University, and a bachelor's in international political economy and German from Belmont University. He's an expert in the emotional and relational sides of money, and I can't wait to dig into this conversation with him. Welcome, Nick. So happy to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So, money. This is a this is such a
Money,
big
money,
one.
money.
Oh, why? So, in your opinion, in your experience, why is it so important for parents to model a healthy relationship with money for their kids?
Sure. I mean, let's start at the beginning. It's a very good place to start, right? So, for me, one of the reasons why it's so important that we do start thinking about how we have these conversations with our children is because it's going to happen whether we like it or not. They're
Mhm.
going to be exposed to how we are talking about it, perhaps as a family unit, as a partnership, or I'm a single parent and I'm stressed maybe about money all the
Mhm.
time. And it's going to come up whether you are explicit about it or not. And so I think that it's very important just because it's viewed so taboo in our society broadly. We don't talk about
Yeah.
sex, money, or politics or religion,
Yep.
maybe, you're right? Those
Yeah.
things. And so that often, I think, comes into how we talk about those topics or don't talk about them with our children too. And so for me, I can say that when I was a kid, it was omnipresent, but I
Mhm.
don't think we talked about it. And
Mm.
it was modeled very differently for me, and it's my own personal relationship with money. It was such an aha moment, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But in hindsight, now that I'm a parent of a 5-year-old, I am really cognizant of how I'm showing up at home and connecting with
Right.
him, period. And then as I unpacked that for myself, I was like, well, if I'm not present, oftentimes it's because of work as a working professional, busy
Right.
guy, right? And my husband is as well. So then it goes into that conversation of, well, why is work so important that I am or am not connecting with my kid? Well, we have to provide for our family. And what does that
Right.
mean in terms of what we're putting in? So you can see how you start to unpack that thread or, unravel that thread a little bit more, that it's just going to be around us at any given point. And our pigs, our kids, ah, our kids are very perceptive, as you are the expert in this space, right? They pick
Yeah.
up on so much.
Pick
And
up on
so
everything.
they pick up on everything. And so that's just something why it's so important to
Yep.
me. It's like I realized, man, it wasn't modeled for me very well. Either, and I'm not just talking about healthy financial habits, just having those conversations or it
Yeah.
being explicit in my household. And then to know, like, as a parent now, it's coming up a lot, whether I like it or not. Like that, it was really the combination of those two things for me.
Right. It's so interesting because when I think back to growing up, my dad would follow us around the house, turn out lights. Like he was very, very stingy with money. And when he passed away, my mom, the first thing she did, which was weird, was book a trip. Like like actually this was not the first. She started booking vacations.
Mm,
She started booking vacations and she started booking, like, I remember we went to Sedona, we went to Vegas. That was the weird one. She was like, she said it out loud to my brother and I. Like, we didn't do so many things. Like, we did vacations and all of that, but we didn't do so many things because of like saving and saving and saving, that she was like, no, now we're going to live our lives. And, she did it in moderation, but she did it. And she made it very clear to connect. We are going to use the things that we earn to enjoy life.
Well, that's what I'm on a mission in in my own company is bringing together money and well-being because
Yes.
we will bring these core attitudes and beliefs about money, usually unconsciously or, in the subconscious
Yes.
to our financial decisions. And they're rooted in childhood, as many of our other sorts of thoughts and
Yep.
beliefs are. And so when in that example that you gave, whether that was modeled for you in different ways or not, but like overall, it sounds like your mom was saying, this is going to bring me joy, and it's something we can do as a family. And we
Yes.
were perhaps coming from a more scarcity mindset,
Yes.
and now we have freedom. And so it sounds to me that perhaps your parents, again, I'm not here to diagnose them by any means, but also had different core attitudes
Very.
and beliefs, and whether they talked about them or not, right? And then how did that show up to you? Like, that's why this is so interesting and complex when you just like have an example like that.
It's so complex. It's so complex. Yeah, I think it's interesting because I also think when we talk about this, like, I know that I ended up adopting, even though my mom did that, more of my father's habits.
Mm,
After my mom passed away, I got worried, and there was this period of time where, like, I didn't know where money, like, I didn't know where meals were going to come or what was going to happen. It's that time period, that very short time period that shaped my relationship with money as an adult. It wasn't the because so I think this is something else to, like, bring up, that, like, things happen in our lives that could, like, completely adjust your mindset around it, and it's giving your child that framework, and that helping them understand the fluctuations that we might feel with money and our well-being. So I love that you're adding this well-being component because it's such a it's such an emotional topic for people. So, when you think about it, how do our own financial beliefs and experiences shape the way we talk with our kids about money?
Yeah, so you just mentioned something that I want to pick up on. I mean, it's
Yeah.
been multiple years running where, I mean, except for maybe COVID, I think, 2020, 2021, where money is the number one stressor in people's lives, regardless of how much they earn. So this is not I don't have money or I
It's
have all the money
interesting.
in the world. It is the number one stressor, and that's from the American Psychological Association. So that's why I think it is so important that we're talking about this, and what you were just describing in terms of something might happen. In financial therapy, we often refer to that as a money flashpoint. So
Mm,
in my personal experience, my dad, and I have a lot more respect for him now than I probably did then, but my dad tried to be an entrepreneur himself. And he went
yes.
off and he started his own business, small business, construction business, and it didn't go well. And we ended up filing for bankruptcy when I was
Mm,
probably like 9 or 10, somewhere around there. And as you know, that's also a really formative time in child development as well.
yeah.
Right. So then my world really shifted, and I didn't understand. I sort of knew because the adults were having conversations around it in on the side, or I just overhear something, but it was never really discussed in the way that this is happening. We're going to adjust. I mean, we went from I'm from Kansas, but like in a town of like 25,000 people. So it wasn't a suburb, but kind of suburban
Right.
life, if you will, to the country, like to an old farmhouse, 100-year-old farmhouse. We didn't have air conditioning. We
Ooh,
burned wood for our
right.
heat, and like those, fine, that's not a problem. But I'm just sort of saying, like,
Right.
my
It was
world,
such an adjustment.
such an adjustment. And I have a little brother who's 3.5 years younger, and so there's just a lot there in terms of like that's a very clear money flashpoint for me. A money
Right.
flashpoint for someone else, though, could be actually like you grow up relatively fine, right, financially or secure, and then you're about ready to go off to college and you find out that college fund isn't there in the way that I thought. And that shifts
Yeah.
how I have to think about my personal future. That didn't happen to me, but I know that that's an example of something that's come up in a kind of different way where, it's not so dramatic perhaps as a money flashpoint, a bankruptcy in your, family's
Sure.
childhood, but rather wow, something I was expecting and just thought was like my path forward. Now I'm completely adjusting. And so what you
Hmm.
were describing with your mom and your dad, it sounds like there could have been something there too.
Yeah, that's interesting that it has a name. Like I love when things actually have a name, like these events. So a money flashpoint. And yeah, like that period when both of them were gone and my brother and I were trying to figure out like, they were school teachers. There wasn't like that much money, but it was like getting them like there wasn't we went from a middle class family to not knowing where the next meal was going to come from. So there was
Right.
that period of time, and that 3 months, that money flashpoint, that 3 months shaped my relationship with money as an adult, despite the like interesting differences between my mom and dad and how they like their relationship with money. But that shaped it to more of a like that the fear of money, the fear of it, and the like, oh my God, I gotta save, make sure it's there. And so it's interesting that you're saying, like, since COVID, like it's the number one, or before COVID, like it was a number one thing for adults. And I wonder why. Like, I wonder what it is.
It's such, I think that I mean, there are a lot of theories, but for me, I think that it goes to just money powers so much of our economic decision making. And I've talked on our podcast before, the Home Ec podcast, that the etymology of the word economy, so the origins, the history of the word
Yeah.
economy comes from two Greek words oikonomia, and
Hmm.
it is household management.
Mm,
And so, if
mm.
you really take it from that perspective, not that the
Interesting.
economy is this big thing out there, we're kind of fish in water and we don't really know that we're in the water, but rather it's our day to day micro decisions and how
Mm,
much money can affect that. From where we choose to live in proximity to our job, where we make our money, to we want to be in the school district if we have the privilege to be in the school district, or where the catchment here in the Philadelphia area of where I am able to send my kids to school, to the
right.
healthcare that we have or do not have. It's so pervasive. And so that's really why I think it's the number one stressor on people's lives, regardless of what they have. Because even if you have a lot, it,
Mm,
it's very cliche. It doesn't bring happiness, but you're sort of you're managing your life in a very different way that's often rooted in money in some form or capacity.
right. Right. Because a lot of what we do, there's that exchange there. It fuels a lot. It fuels a lot. So obviously, as with everything in life, how we model our relationship with money, how we model anything, our kids pick up on.
Hmm.
So, what is the age? Like, let's dive in now to like how to talk about it. What's the age? And obviously, there's developmentally appropriate things at different ages, but how do we start? Let's start with the how. How do we start talking to our kids about this? How do we start modeling this? How do we do this?
Sure. I think that what you just mentioned in terms of like developmentally appropriate kind of approaches is really where I start. So in a lot of ways, it is meeting our children where they are, in the spirit that my son, after we pick him up from school, he loves to go to Trader Joe's. And I mentioned he's 5. And that it's a fun experience and it's a nice kind of bonding thing that he
Yeah.
has with his other dad and me, and at the same time it's like, well, I don't want to spend money every time I pick you up from school to go get a treat or something, right?
Right.
But there's an opportunity for us where he loves numbers. This is just, personal. He loves numbers. And so
Hmm.
that's kind of a lower barrier to entry, where we can introduce these concepts that, oh, this little snack that you want to get at the store costs something. That money is a concept, that it's not that we just sort of get it. And these kind of cliche things of like money doesn't grow on trees, that you might have grown up
Yeah, yeah,
hearing,
yeah.
those are other ways that kids can pick up. If I had taken that approach, was like, well, Benjamin, money doesn't grow on trees. We can't go to Trader Joe's today. That that type of stuff gets passed on. So instead, we're sort of saying, well, let's talk about your number blocks that you have, and let's
Mm,
think about your piggy bank. He does have a little piggy bank at home, and sure, it's full of coins, and we're not sitting there being like 25 plus 25 and whatever is this, but we're sort of understanding that making something that could be very high level and abstract becomes concrete. And
mm,
that's this notion of psychological distance and temporal distance, as well as physical distance. And are you a strategic and abstract thinker naturally, which is something that is true, or are you more of a concrete and detailed thinker? And at 5 years old, I have no idea, right? It's not about understanding that for him, but rather money. He has no concept of that. But
Mhm.
where we can say, you've got these discrete coins and your gummy bear thing, right? The little package costs
Yeah.
X. It's going to be this many coins or this number of coins, even. So he sort of starts to orient himself to that. But I do
Hmm.
know very close friends of mine where they, as a couple, so this is more on the how to. If you are in a partnership and you have a co-parent, you're having that conversation together in terms of are you on the same page as to the approach as well. So
Hmm.
going back to that psychological distance piece, what we did find, because they've taken some of our assessments, is one partner is a strong, concrete, and detailed thinker, and those are often more worried about the what and maybe the how of different decisions that they have to make, whereas abstract and strategic and abstract thinkers are more why and high level. And so when it comes to goal setting or having that conversation with their kids, they're coming at it from a very different point of view, period.
Like how? Like how would one come at it and the other one come at it?
Yeah, so I can tell you the husband in this case is like, I'm ready to have this conversation with our kid, and I want him to be able to understand, not just numeracy, but rather I am ready to just introduce this topic and it's time. And the wife, who is the more abstract thinker, who's coming at this from the why, she's asking, like, well, why now? What is it about this
Hmm.
that makes it the appropriate time? And so that was just an area for them that became a point of conflict. And she needed to better what this is interesting about goal setting in general. Abstract thinkers and concrete thinkers, when you're setting goals, oftentimes you actually have to take the opposite approach. So you have to abstract it for a concrete thinker and make it more concrete for an abstract thinker.
Mm.
So for her, he needed to be able to articulate the steps that he wanted to take or the ideas that he had and make it concrete for her in a way that brought them together. And she needed to better understand or articulate, well, why is it that I don't think at 4 or 5 years old for their kid, their oldest kid, why she was thinking about that. So it comes to
Yeah.
really about interpersonal communication, but so less about the exact approach with their child, but are they on the same page as
Got you.
co-parents at
I
the same
got you.
time?
I got you. Because it's interesting as you're talking about this, I'm also thinking about like what have been some of the best lessons that Charlie has had about money. And it's not just how my husband and I communicate about money. One of the best lessons was him breaking one of his toys and
Were
being
you going to replace it or not?
yeah, like him being like he would roughhouse with things like throw him, whatever, and one of his toys broke that he really loved. And yeah, it was a really great opportunity. And it was, and I'm gonna be honest, like it was like he'll Matt and I were both immediately annoyed and we had to check ourselves because like, he's being rough with them and all of that. But it was like, yes, this moment ended up happening. And again, in hindsight, it was like, oh my God, this was so great that this happened. But we helped him recognize at that moment that that had value to it. Like it had personal value because he loved that toy. So it had a deep meaning for him, and it had a cost value to it. That it was not it was something that was worth something emotionally to him and something that was worth something monetarily to him. And we were able to have that conversation, and we did not replace the toy, but he had the opportunity over time when he earns money to be able to replace that toy himself
Right.
if he would choose to do so. And I think that was such a, again, it gave us the very concrete way to be able to start helping him understand the monetary value of things.
Right. And when we're parenting, we are trying to prime them, right, in different ways. You probably talk about you or you I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but probably talked about kind of, hey, this is a toy that you care about, be careful with it, right? Or be
Yep.
gentle, if it
Mhm.
breaks, whether you got to that point or not. But in the abstract, that can be something that's really hard for him to understand. But then once
Sure.
it broke, then it becomes more real. And that's
Yeah,
that
it's
sort of
very concrete.
temporal distance, right? And I'm
Right,
not sure,
right.
maybe it was for you and your husband, but perhaps not thinking about parenting. Was
Mhm.
that a money focused conversation, or was it really around, hey, take care of your stuff
You know, I think it was both. It was a take care of your stuff thing. Like these things
that you care
they
about?
don't, yeah, that you care about don't just they don't just grow on trees. Like there's they were gifts, they were things that you want, like this is important. And also it's an opportunity to like help him have gratitude over the things
Mm,
that he has that other people might not. But it did open the door for a conversation around money that he would get. Like I found that you know, I bought Charlie a piggy bank early on that has like invest, donate, save, and spend. So it has
hmm.
different slots that he can put coins in. And obviously when I think bought it when he was really young, like he didn't understand it. But we've had an opportunity to start learning about what everything is. The invest one is really complicated, but
Sure.
the save and the spend, like he's starting to understand those concepts, but it gave an opportunity to talk about money.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I sort of asked on that particular piece, because you this question was around the how. And if you had just introduced that sort of envelope method, if you will, like these different buckets, of
Hmm.
different types of money accounts, he's not going to understand that. But then when you
Nope.
tie it to something that is around the other areas of your life and that you're trying to teach your children, that's where you can introduce it. So it is both meeting them where they are, but it's just a natural entry point. It doesn't have to be a forced conversation either.
Right. So what are some ways that parents can like if we're thinking about the guardrails and like actual tools and tips on how to do this, you have allowance, you have earning money, you have like what are ways that parents can actually start introducing once a child is starting to cognitively be able to understand or has the toy experience where they break something or can't buy something at a store. What are some ways to talk to a child about it? Like just concrete ways. And I know
Yeah,
it's different for every family.
sure. And I think that I'll take it a little different and then come back to your question is like, let's make sure that we as parents know our own money stories first.
Okay.
Right. And so what we do, we have this concept called financial schema, and it's rooted in cognitive behavioral therapy and schema therapy, really, to say, because when I think about an allowance, the thing that comes to mind, and it's different for every family, is that, you are doing perhaps chores or you're working towards that. And that is a fundamental value of, that you work to earn money. And I'm not
Hmm.
here to pontificate right or wrong on that, but just sort of say, like, you are now introducing a belief system to that conversation and that approach. So do you understand where some of that yourself as a parent might be coming from?
Hmm.
So I just wanted to sort of think about that, because what we see that in the financial schema is we see a financial control is pretty dominant for a lot of people. And I think it comes from, financial independence is a really positive thing. Everyone, I think, wants to be financially independent, and that's a healthy thing. And
Hmm.
yet, if it skews a little bit too far, it becomes more rigid, perhaps, in the way that your father demonstrated financial
Hmm.
control.
Hmm. Hmm.
Other people have self-regulation issues, emotional spending, other things like that. Otherwise, it could be sense of self and external comparison, keeping up with the Joneses. So those are
Hmm.
kind of like the high level categories that we think about when we're thinking about these money stories and core attitudes and beliefs. So understanding like where you are and how that might show up in introducing allowance, introducing saving, I think that's a really important place to start, is having that self-awareness first. Because yes, I think personally having a savings account for a long, for your children is super important, and then being able to help them understand like what you've been doing. So my grandparents, I mentioned my own parents, like we filed for bankruptcy, all these things, but my grandparents actually set up a savings account at the local credit union. It was a way that we actually were able to buy Christmas gifts for our family. Like
Hmm.
they empowered my brother and me to shop for Christmas gifts when they put $100 or something in a savings account every year. And
Hmm.
I remember when I went to go close out that account, my grandparents had passed and I never longer lived in my hometown. And the woman at the counter, and she kind of shamed me, but like it was a profound moment in a lot of ways. She said, "Oh, I think your grandmother would be really sad about this." Because I
Mm,
wasn't coming at it from a savings perspective and like the more financial security perspective. And
yeah,
now, probably 15 years later, 20 years later, I'm thinking, oh man, like had I just let money sit there and ride, in a high yield savings account, I would be in a different place or that account would have grown, all those things. But I
sure.
had all of these different conflicting values. But as a kid, that was what she was trying to demonstrate for me, that it was both a place of generosity and gratitude that I was able to buy Christmas gifts for other people. But it was a
Right.
way to say, like, there are these accounts and that we can do this together and all of those things. So like that's one way. And then the allowance thing, I never had an allowance. And so that is one thing as I'm parenting, again, what was modeled for me, I have been sort of thinking about, well, yes, I do want to teach Benjamin, our son, to pick up his toys, to clean his room, to, chip in around the house, those types of things. But is it tied to money? And that's
Or
sort of what
just stuff you should be doing.
stuff you should be doing, right? And you're building those other types of skills too. So, again, I'm not here to say right or wrong, but as we think about what you're told, you need a budget, you need a rainy day fund, right? You need all of these things as an adult. And how are we building financial literacy and financial knowledge in our children? I think we have to just better understand, like, well, as we introduce these topics, what are we trying to accomplish with them?
Yeah. It's very interesting because as I'm thinking this through, my brother and I had a very unique experience growing up. I've said this before, my parents were school teachers in the Bronx, and they raised us in this community that was very wealthy. Like it cost a lot to be raised there. So we would work on the weekends at antique shows and flea markets because my grandfather was a jeweler. We would sell.
Hmm.
So starting from the age of 5, like really little kid, like I was born, like that's where I would spend my weekends selling, working. And at 5, and my brother was 11, my parents said, stop complaining because we were complaining. We're like, we want to go play and watch Saturday morning cartoons. Like, stop complaining. What business you want to be in? We were kids, so we're like toys. So they gave us $400. They took us down to the wholesale district, and it was a loan. They gave us the money, and we picked out our inventory. Taught us how to do that. They taught us how to market. They taught us how to set the business up. And so we had a business. I had a business at 5 years old. I earned my money. Like I earned everything. So I always had that. Like I worked and earned money and learn how to save some to buy more inventory and replenish and all of that. So it's very interesting being a parent now because that resonated with me a lot. That worked for me. I'm not going to go make my child work at a flea market right now. Like that's not my life right now.
Sure.
But it's very interesting because I am noticing it as a parent. Like that is a value that I have. Like you earn your money, you work for it. And I'm finding it. I have definitely a struggle because it's a different situation. And but every time I go to buy something or do something from Charlie, I have that internal struggle because those were my parents' values.
Right.
My husband and I have different values, and we want Charlie to earn and learn the value of money and all of that. But it's a very interesting internal struggle every time we go to purchase something for him. And so, yes, understanding our own values and all of that is absolutely critical. But I also find from the work that I do is that parents tend to they might be more stingy with themselves than they are with their children.
Right. And one of those other schema that we have, it's considered financial sacrifices.
Hmm.
Are you willing to sacrifice parts of your own well-being often for others? And again, that sounds altruistic, but when it goes to a more extreme place, it can become more problematic. And so that's
Hmm.
sort of right. Like there's always a balance to many of these types of issues. And just it sounds like for you and your family, there are certain core values that you really believe are positive and something that you want to instill, but it's just sort of understanding the delivery of that and how do you
Yeah.
articulate that and model that for your son.
Right. Right. But I think when we're talking about, like, I understand, like, you have to look at yourself, but when we're also talking about techniques with children and teaching about it, I think there's ways that you can teach children and model for children, not only with exchanging dollars and cents. I think volunteering time, like, you can do it, teach this also with time and volunteer work and giving to other people and taking. Like, I think there's ways that we can model this in beyond just the exchange of money. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I'm kind of in violent agreement, really, as you say that, because I mean, it resonates so deeply that there are so
Mhm,
many ways that we can model this outside of, as you said, sort of the exchange of dollars and cents. Whether that's volunteering, it could be, we support our son's school too, right? And so how are we, it's not just volunteering, but sort of, hey, your school needs this. This is a value to
mhm,
others, right? And this
mhm.
is for us as a family value, also a way that we are fine spending money, right? So that's something else. And how are you showing up in your community? How are you showing up for your friends? And does that make sense? It's definitely an area that we want to model, and I think that it's also where, as think about how much money powers so many different areas of our lives. If we take that our own inventory, not of our core attitudes and beliefs, but rather like where does it show up in our lives, and then we're
Mhm.
able to share that with our children and be more open about it instead of it's something that we don't talk about. It's just bringing it to the surface. That's going to be a recurring theme throughout this conversation. It's like we have to just keep bringing this to the surface and find out what makes sense for you, and again, what's developmentally appropriate, probably for your child.
Right, right, right. So your whole thing is we really have to focus on us as adults first, as our and as if we're in a partnership, the values that we're both bringing and what's important to us. If you're a single parent, really thinking about your values, but also, circumstances shift and those, what did you call those again? The
Flashpoint.
pivot, the money flashpoints in life. You know, let's say you have a little bit of an older child. Let's say, an 8-year old or not, like, again, they're more understanding of their own, like, of what money is and does. Do you talk directly? Like, how did what are your recommendations around, like, the conversation when you are not going to buy something or when you are going to buy something? Like, what are the conversations there?
Yeah, I think that you do have more direct conversations as children get older. And I think that's true across many domains. As an adoptive dad, that's what comes to mind as we share his adoption story with him. There are different ways that we communicate and things that he will understand at different phases. So yes, I think you can be more direct with older children. I think that you can also introduce that value system in slightly different ways. That's a great way, I think, where you're able to say, hey, you can start to make money in different ways and save for the things that you want.
Mhm.
And also, that timeline is really important. Is it about, it's also self regulation. Like, do you want something now, right? You want the toy, a thing, or is it really about, oh, as you think about you're 12 and now or 13 and you're going to high school and you want a car at 15, 16, 17, like whatever that might be, right? How do you start introducing some level of distance between you and the thing that you actually want to spend money on?
Mm,
So I think that's also very interesting because it's so hard to be like, yeah, in 30 years you're going to retire and whatever, right? Or 40 years at that point. But if you come back and say like these are the things that are relevant to you today as an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 15-year-old, whatever that might be, I think that's where you can introduce these conversations, especially if you haven't, in a way that they're going to be more receptive to. In financial literacy education, there's some strong results that show broad financial literacy education doesn't have a huge effect on people. You might go through a formal class in high school or something. A lot of people advocate for formal financial literacy education
mhm.
in high school. I was really fortunate. I actually wrote a little homage to my consumer education, consumer science teacher in high school. She since passed, but like I remember in hindsight now, I learned a ton, but so many things didn't feel relevant at the time. And so when you meet people where they are with the things that are important to them at that moment, things stick more. And so if it's like, oh,
Right.
it's not about balance, you need a budget or balance a checkbook that a skill you need one day. It's actually about yeah, it might be saving for that toy or that one-time expense, but you're also sort of introducing, I love the book, Waiting is Hard, and so with
Right,
those concepts
right,
too.
right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. Piggy and Gerald book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So, okay, so let's put this out. Like, both of our sons are 5, and teeth are falling, tooth fairy. So my son actually just got kind of set the precedent in a bad way. I didn't have change for a $5 bill, so I set a bad precedent with the first tooth fairy visit of $5, which is
Oh
way too
boy.
much. I know. And it was like, ah. But let's say the child is getting tooth fairy money and saving them money. Like, what's a good way to help have a conversation around that money? Like, or they're gifted some money from a grandparent or an uncle, what aunt, like what's a good way to have conversations around that?
Yeah. So I think that that's where the envelope or bucketing method really makes sense. What I would encourage is, again, meeting folks where your kids where they are, is it a toy? Is it a thing right now? Right. And you can sort of say, like, okay, we're going to have this bucket of money here, right? You get $5. How do you think you want to spend this? And but sort of start to break it up to, like, you have $5. Let's take part of that money and put it towards here, but there's always some, maybe it's a small percentage of that amount that goes to a slightly longer term horizon.
Mm,
And
okay.
so Benjamin get monetary gifts, and of course he's not saying, let me put it in the college fund, let me put it in a savings account, right? He would
Right.
go spend it today. So we're trying to introduce, like, yes, you can get something in a much more shorter term, right? And that's going to go into this bucket, but we're always going to share a little bit more in a longer term sense, that we're introducing those concepts too, where he may not go to college, and but the 529 plan, right? Like, we've got this long term thing that he might be able to use on another thing that we'll introduce later on, but we are setting him up because we can do that for long term financial success while also allowing him to understand the needs today. Does that make sense?
It does. So also maybe like again something like for a 5-year-old, okay, you want this Lego. We can use and you have $10. We can and the Lego costs 5.99. We can buy that. But what's like for the remaining $3.01, what's something from a year from now you might want, or what's something 6 months from now? So, like maybe identifying something in the future that they might want that they can start saving to, but something that's like that they can relate to, that they identify.
That's right. Yeah. And for us, right, man, our son, he is obsessed with Christmas and his birthday. They're both in December.
Mhm.
And we're recording this in March. So that might be an interesting indication where, yeah, he wants that 5.99 Lego. We don't need to put a dollar, whatever, towards college in that sense, but it could be like, well, let's put this other amount towards something that you'd be able to use in December or something, so it does
Right,
prolong that timeline, but that's something he loves. And it goes to, like, intrinsic and autonomous motivation as well. So,
right,
so that's
right.
one thing that I think, where we can try to make these internal motivations come out for kids. That's where the financial literacy lessons are going to stick in a way
Mhm.
that they may not, or they may not in a healthier way when they're that external motivation instead.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's super interesting. So any other tips or advice around how we hold ourselves as parents, or conversations that we should be having with our kids, or with our just in general with ourselves or with our significant others?
The one thing that I introduced, what are your core attitudes and beliefs? Maybe what are your partners or your co-parents, attitudes and beliefs, and how that shows up for your kids. But going back to gifts and Christmas, I don't, as much as I would like to, I don't control what my mom gives
Hmm.
Benjamin, like, when
Hmm.
he's over at their house or at the holidays or whatever. And so understanding where some of those beliefs come up, not just from ourselves and our parents, but like those strong and weak relationships across a family system, and how
Interesting.
you are influenced. And then even if you don't have control, where might that show up in, their interactions with their grandparents or their aunts and uncles or something like that? That may, again, depending on the strength or weakness of that relationship, it will have a different level of influence, but
Hmm.
we don't get to understand that, if we're not around that every day. And so just some level of awareness where, gosh, when my mom and I both took our, the persona wealth assessments and I was like, oh my God, I'm like my mother. Like we had very similar ones.
Yeah.
So like in a data-driven way, I was able to see like, oh, this is where I get it much more than my dad, even though I would have, and maybe do, but like blame my dad for the bankruptcy and my money flashpoint. So therefore,
Hmm.
a lot of my stuff must be rooted in that. Well,
Hmm.
actually, it's my mom. But then her sister is very different than her. And we've had a lot of conversations around why that might be, which has been a really healthy way to introduce money conversations with end of life planning. Not that hopefully we're
Hmm.
not there with my family, but how does that show up there? Where I'm very much a sandwich generation.
Hmm.
And how are we going to communicate those different dynamics across generations? And how will that show up with our son and potentially future kids too? That's something that
Hmm.
is very, very much on my mind right now.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. And one of the things that one of the things I have a, like when you bring up holidays and that your son's birthday and Christmas is all around in December, I have a lot of mixed feelings about the holidays because I realize that like Charlie is spoiled around the holidays. I don't know how else to say it.
Benjamin too.
And I'm so guilty of it. Like I just am so guilty of it. And the people around him want to spoil it. It's fun. It's fun. And I recognize we're privileged to be able to do that.
Sure.
And so I've tried to counteract it a little bit by making him that he has to go through his toys and look at what he wants to donate and be part of that and give to children that might be in need. But also I've watched some of my friends evolve out of that and place value on experience over things. And I've
Yeah.
loved that shift. I've loved watching that shift. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Like how, like, and I'm not saying there's wrong or right in either, but how you like can how families, and I'm not expecting you to have the answer here. We can just talk about it. How families can shift from tangible items to experiential items if that's part of their value shift that they want to make. Because I know that's something that I want to make with Charlie and my family is the more experiential shifts in how we spend our money.
Sure. And I got to tell you, growing up for me, experiences, it was not about that. Yeah, at least not explicitly. We did a lot of things
Hmm.
as families, but we didn't take vacations. We were too poor kind of thing. But, so
Yeah.
stuff, it was really around gifts. And I think if you put any stock in love languages, like gifts is one of mine. So therefore, like
Yeah.
I love giving gifts too,
Love it.
whether people want to receive them or not. Like I love doing that. And so why I bring that up is when I was learning that, oh, people actually, you can gift a membership to the zoo or a membership to the Franklin Institute here in Philadelphia. I was like, that's a great gift. I love that idea, right?
Hmm.
So I love that that's sort of what we started asking for instead of, cheap plastic crap, for instance.
Right.
But what this where when if we reintroduce well-being into this conversation,
Yes, please.
and there are generally five elements of well being from kind of positive psychology, right? Positive emotions, which is kind of self
Hmm.
explanatory, but, I feel joy, things that bring
Hmm.
positive emotions. Positive engagement. So you've got a P, positive emotions, but then engagement. And those are engaging activities that bring you joy or flow or put you in a state of
Hmm.
flow.
Hmm.
R, relationships, strong and positive relationships. M, meaning. And A, accomplishment.
Hmm.
And so PERMA is sort of the acronym. And if you think about how you're spending money in relationship to those factors, that's certainly, I think, where experiences can come in. And you can sort of say, like,
Right.
what's going to enhance my well being, my kids' well being, us as a family unit? That is what I think is really beautiful when you think about the PERMA framework for well being and how that interacts with
Right.
money.
Right. I love that. And I think that also, not to open up the big can of worms on parental burnout, I think that also kind of ties into the importance of self-care as a parent.
Yeah.
To be able to have the PERMA family well-being, like to be able to do that because again, we can't, if our oxygen mask is on, I hate this expression, we can't help other people at
Right. I
all.
mean, what we see in our data is that if you're strong in R, I mean, they're not trade-offs. I mean, what you want is it's a rising all tides approach, really.
Hmm.
But you
Hmm.
could be strong in R, but you're really low in P and E. So
Hmm.
that could be, in a parenting sense, I'm hypothesizing here, strong attachment maybe, but you're burnout, right? And not as
Yeah.
strong of boundaries for you as a parent. And if it's lower on the R, then let's focus on how we strengthen those relationships with our children
Hmm.
and the other people in our family. So that's why I just love it, and can sort of do these quick check-ins. I mean, there are these assessments that we provide. That's not a plug, but just sort of like
Yep.
that you're sort of able to say like, where am I after over different time periods, and
Yep.
do I need to at least think about using money in this sense in a different way to support any of those five factors?
Right. I love that. So P, let's go through it again. P, positive emotion.
Hmm.
E was what?
Engaging activities.
Engaging activities. R is relationships. M is meaning. And
Hmm.
A was
Accomplishment.
accomplishment. I love that. I love that framework around
An
well-being.
accomplishment, right? Like might be job related or kind of performance related in different realms, or it could be like, you know what? I checked that thing off my to-do list today and I feel
Which is
accomplished.
huge, which is huge, which is huge, which is also why it is super important when we think about positive psychology, like as much as possible, end your day, not just for your child, but for you, asking as a family unit what went really well today.
Yeah,
Because in those hard days, like again, if we're able to kind of reframe how we're thinking and focus on that and build that muscle. Accomplishment isn't necessarily like I won the award. Accomplishment can simply be like, hey, I got up and I did my things today.
absolutely. I showed up as a parent, right? Great.
Yes.
You can
Yes.
celebrate that. If it was a
Yes.
really rough day or you didn't have the
Hmm.
energy, that's
Hmm.
enough.
Hmm.
And I think that there's such an interesting opportunity for us to have that awareness show up, and gratitude is a huge muscle. We are rewiring
Huge.
if you think about money as the number one stressor in most American adults' lives
Yep.
and a leading, cause of conflict in relationship, including divorce,
Money.
our brains are acting very differently when it comes to money conversations and in these economic
Hmm.
decisions. And
Hmm.
when you reframe it in the ways that you just described, you are literally rewiring your brain to do so.
Literally. Hmm. And we need to give ourselves the fighting chance. And
That,
there's
right?
very
Fight,
simple
flight,
ways that we could do it.
freeze, etc. And we are
Yeah.
literally trying to fight in a very different way here.
Very different way. All right. So, Nick, if there are five takeaways that you would want to give, you want the parents that are listening to this to walk away with, what are they?
I think number one is have these conversations because they're gonna, your beliefs about money, whatever, will go through your family system no matter whether you like it or not. So it's going to happen. So have the conversations, developmentally appropriate, et cetera, as we talked about. I think that there's an interesting opportunity. We're talking about money today on the Hey Kiddo podcast, but ultimately, I'm sure so many of the topics that you discuss here can be applied even in the money
Yes.
context. So don't silo them in your life.
Yes.
So you can draw inspiration in these lessons from different areas. Know your own story. That's like
Hmm.
a big one, right? Know what your own core attitudes and beliefs are. Like, did you have any money flashpoints in your own life? And you're still here. You've shown resiliency, right? And how might that show up for your kids? But also, life happens. And I think what's important to know is if and when that day happens, that there's a money flashpoint again in your adult life, that's going to be part of your children's lives too. So, how are you going to be prepared if that day happens, right? Like life isn't smooth.
Yep.
So, those are three. I don't know what the other two might be. There are plenty, but like that's three that
Yep.
really come to mind is know thyself in some senses. And then also, how are you going to build some resilience and be prepared for that so that it may be less of a stressor for your kids as they
Yeah.
become adults?
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm going to add the PERMA because I
Oh,
think
yeah.
that's,
Oh, yes. Thank
yeah,
you.
the well being part of this. Like it's everything. It's
Yeah.
everything.
And again, I think it's an easy framework. I mean, it doesn't mean that the work is easy, but if it's easy, kind of like I
Mhm.
live my life by frameworks, I really do, and they serve as
Yeah.
touch points for me, right?
Yeah.
Like I can
Sure.
touch stones where I can say, okay, how am I doing on these factors? Maybe I need to pay attention to something in this area more. And yeah, so thank you for reminding me that that's a huge takeaway for me too.
Absolutely. Nick, thank you so much for being on the Hey Kiddo podcast. This was wonderful. It was an enlightening I feel like I went through some therapy. So I
Great.
really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, this is a topic that people don't talk about, so please talk about it.
Let's keep talking. Okay.
Thanks for listening to Hey Kiddo. If you like what you hear, give us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Learn more about Hey Kiddo at our website, hey-kiddo.com. Have a question for our experts? Email us at hello@hey-kiddo.com.